After studying this module, you shall be able to know about the principal component analysis and its data set, understand the goals and applications of PCA, learn about multidimensional scaling and understand its applications. The present module introduces the two important multivariate techniques to the readers: principal component analysis (PCA) and multidimensional scaling, that MDS. The two powerful statistical techniques are widely used in social science research in contemporary times. The principal component analysis is the method to reduce the number of parameters while maintaining information as much as possible. The aim of the PCA is to transfer a set of correlated variables into a new set of uncorrelated variables. It reduces the original number of variables to the new components that are orthogonal to each other and explains or summarizes the underlying variance covariance structure of a large set of variables through a few linear combinations of these variables. The multidimensional scaling is a popular multivariate technique that seeks latent variables by exploring the observed data. The MDS attempts to investigate the similarities among the observed entities and then identify if the set of data can be best described as lying on two or more dimensions. The focus in MDS is to scale stimuli on various psychophysical attributes and then explore their similarities. The mathematical model used in MDS is the same as factor analysis. So, we shall take up principal component analysis first and understand what the concept is about. The principal component analysis, or PCA. The principal component analysis is the method to study, visualize and analyze a large set of data. So, you have large data sets that can be used for PCA applications. One of the most popular multivariate technique and it belonging to a general linear model, that is GLM, the goal of the PCA is to simplify the data and extract the relevant and useful information out of it. The extracted information is expressed as a set of new orthogonal variables called principal components. It is a method in which the large data set is reduced to a small number of manageable components that represent a common theme or a construct. The components capturing as much original variance in the data as possible are uncorrelated with each other. The data in PCA also represents the pattern of similarity of the observations and the variables by displaying them as points in maps. The goals of PCA. The goals of PCA are: first, to extract the most important information from the data table and compress or reduce the size of the data set by keeping only the relevant information. It simplifies the description of the data set, and PCA also helps and aims to analyze the structure of the observations and the variables. The PCA also maps the data into a space of low dimensionality. The applications of PCA. In social sciences, especially in psychology, the PCA is used for visualization of the data, reduction of the data, classification of the data, and finding the relationship between the variables, for doing trend analysis, for psychometric test construction, and for reduction of noise. The principal component analysis versus factor analysis. Both factor analysis and principal component analysis are the methods of extracting factors or components from the correlation matrix. The two methods that are quite similar in their theoretical considerations are often known to yield similar results. They differ in how they analyze the variance in the correlation matrix. The method of vector analysis distinguishes between specific variance and error variance from the common variance, whereas the PCA ignores the distinction among the different sources of variance. The method of PCA analyzes total variance in the correlation matrix, and it assumes that the components derived from the dataset can explain all the variance. As a result, the components extracted by using PCA are known to include a certain amount of error and specific variances. When to use PCA? PCA is applied to a dataset which has either interval or ratio levels of measurement. The variables for PCA should be normally distributed, linearly related and independent of each other. It is used when there are at least 5 observations per variable, and it is used when total number of observations should be 100 at least. The participants to variable ratio in PCA should be 5:1 at the minimum, though the ideal ratio documented in the literature is 10:1. It is used when the aim is to reduce the number of variables to be used in other GLM technique like regression, MANOVA, etc. When attempting to identify the latent constructs that are being measured by the observed variables in the absence of a priori theory, then PCA proves its application. The data set in PCA. PCA is applied to the data tables where rows are considered as individuals or participants and the columns are considered as quantitative variables. Such tables where individuals are represented in rows and variables are listed in columns are very common in many fields like sensory analysis, genetics, ecology, biology, psychology and sociology. Thus, the technique has widespread applications in various other disciplines also. The aim of PCA is to characterize the individuals according to the quantitative variables. The data set in principal component analysis can be studied in different ways. First, the data can be visualized as a set of rows to see differences from one row to another or similarities from one row to another. And the data table can also be seen as a set of columns to understand the similarities or the links between the columns. The study of individuals or the rows. The characterization of the group of individuals or participants by the variables. For the study of individuals, that is to say for the study of rows, the data table tells us when two individuals are close and when they are different from the point of view of all the variables. In case there are many individuals, it can also be used to propose a typology of the individuals, that is to say, which are the most similar individuals and which are the most dissimilar ones. The PCA can also tell us whether there exists any group of individuals which are homogeneous in terms of their similarities. Also, it can also reveal the common dimension of variability that oppose extreme and intermediate individuals. The study of variables or the columns is also done through PCA, and to specify the individual's participant and to better understand the link between the variables, as we had told you initially. Now for columns, as for the individuals, the PCA can tell and interpret about the similarities between the quantitative variables. In PCA, the variables are generally talked about in terms of relationship rather than similarity. So in other words, the technique tells us about the relationship between the quantitative variables. As the best known relationship between the variables is the linear relationship, so the PCA focuses on the linear relationships between the variables. However, more complex relationships like quadratic relationships, logarithmic and exponential functions may also exist, but PCA is generally known for studying the linear relationships only. Similar to the grouping of individuals, PCA can also be used to create groups of variables. And the aim of PCA is to draw conclusions from the linear relationship between variables by detecting principal dimension of variability. Thus, PCA is a method to jointly study the individuals and the variables to reinforce their respective interpretations. When studying individuals, groups of individuals are built and then characterized on the basis of variables. Similarly, when there are groups of variables, it may not be easy to interpret the relationship between many variables. In such a case, individuals who are extreme from the point of view of these relationships can be used to make interpretation about the variables. Issues with PCA. PCA is a descriptive method to explore the data, and the data is visualized with simple graphics. PCA also leads to data compression, and it summarizes and synthesizes the information contained in a table by viewing it. Let's go to the other multivariate technique, that is the multidimensional scaling. The multidimensional scaling, or the concept of MDS. In unidimensional scaling, we believe that the data varies along a single dimension only. In unidimensional scaling, one specifies the dimension in advance and the responses are generated accordingly. However, in reality, the stimuli vary on a number of dimensions and simultaneously. In MDS, the subject would not be informed in advance about the dimension on which the response is to be generated. Rather, an overall similarities or dissimilarities in the stimuli are the basis of responding by the subject. The concept of MDS proves to be very useful when the aim is to know about which possible dimensions may be used by the respondents in arriving at a response. So, no preliminary instructions about the response criteria are given to the subjects. The subjects decide the response and they use their ingenuity and preferences in arriving at those responses. The other study where MDS is employed is when the decisive dimensions are known, but their respective contribution in arriving at the response may not be known, or it may not be clear about which dimension is more preferred in arriving at the response that the subject is giving. So, it is not clear how a subject uses these dimensions to differentiate the stimuli and arrive at a particular response. For example, a subject may use two dimensions to arrive at a response, but then which one is more important in judgment needs to be known. Alternatively, there is a possibility that although two dimensions were given as the criteria, the subject actually used just one of them and arrived at the response. When such a situation is there and the researcher would like to investigate which dimension is proving to be more useful in arriving at a response by the subject, then MDS proves to be really important. Let us pick up an example also and explain this. When some teachers are asked to compare their 20 students in pairs and rate if they are similar, each teacher has 190 comparisons to be made for each student. The data is obtained for all the teachers and an MDS program is run for it. It is possible that after application of the software, the two dimensions emerge, that is, academic achievement, which was rated from excellent to below average, and the regularity in attending lectures, which was ranged from very regular to very irregular. On the basis of the responses, if MDS is run, then one can understand which dimension may have been really the deciding factor in arriving at the response by the teachers. Thus, the implicit model of how similarity judgments are produced by the brain is that items have attributes such as size, viciousness, intelligence, furriness, etc. in varying degrees. And the similarity between items is a function of their similarity or dissimilarity in scores across all the attributes. This function is often conceived of as a weighted sum of similarity across each attribute, where the weights reflect the importance or saliency of the attribute. So once the important and decisive attributes are identified, the data interpretation becomes more valid and has more substance, because the researcher can also shed light on what were the particular dimensions that led to arriving at the response by the subject. The spatial representation of MDS. The multidimensional scaling is a statistical procedure that aims to visualize the similarities among the entities in a dataset. The basic algorithm used for MDS is that every entity in the dataset can be represented in a p-dimensional Euclidean geometric space. There are other metric and non-metric spatial representation also, but we will concentrate on Euclidean space only. A dataset can be represented using n-1 dimensional space, where n is the number of items being scaled. The Euclidean space mapping is the most popular method of representation of points in MDS. The number of dimensions to be chosen for representing a dataset poses some problems, like impossibility in representing 4 or more dimensions on paper, or increasing dimension lead to complexities in the stress function. We shall explore these points in the coming sections again. The representation and visualization of the data set is a complex mathematical proposition. Statistically speaking, MDS attempts to find a set of vectors in a p-dimensional space. The Euclidean distance between the points in this space has to be so close or as close as possible to the input data matrix. This is achieved by minimizing the criteria of stress function. The process makes use of monotonic regression, also known as isotonic regression, and the stress can be found using the formula that is given: square root of sum of f xij minus dij whole square upon the scale, where dij is the Euclidean distance between I and j across all the dimension, and fxj is some function of the input data. The scale is the constant scaling factor used to keep the stress value between 0 and 1. Conventionally speaking, the acceptable range of stress is 0.1 to 0.15. Ideal case is a zero stress matrix. A stress value of more than 0 indicates distortion of the input data in the distance map. The causes of high stress coefficient can be random measurement error and insufficient dimensionality. The different spatial representation of the MDS are the classical MDS, also known as the principal coordinate analysis. This method takes the input matrix, which gives dissimilarities between pairs, and the output matrix aims to minimize the strain function. The method is also called as the Torgerson-Gower scaling. The metric MDS is the representation. In this, we use the input matrix of unknown distances, and the procedure to obtain the output matrix aims to minimize the loss function or the stress function. The metric MDS is used for data in metric scales of measurement, that is, when the data is in interval and ratio scales. The non-metric MDS aims to find the relationships and Euclidean distance between the items and the input matrix. The non-metric MDS is used for data in ordinal scale. The method is used to find relationship is isotonic regression, and an example of non-metric MDS is Gutmann's smallest space analysis. Let us analyze and look into the steps in MDS application to the data. There are several steps in applying the MDS to the research. First would be the formulation of the problem. The aim of the research should be clear with the number of variables that the researcher wishes to compare, as too many variables to be compared means confusion, whereas too less would not bring valid results. The input data, the subject may be asked series of questions for each pair of items to be compared on similarity on a Likert type scale or a semantic differential scale. The data can also be gathered by asking the preferences rather than similarities among the pairs. Running the MDS on the obtained data. The software for running the procedure is available in many software for statistics. The software provides an option between the metric and the non-metric MDS also. The next step would be deciding the number of dimensions to be created. The researcher must decide on the number of dimensions they want the software to create. Of course, a high number of dimensions to be extracted leads to a better statistical fit. One must keep in mind that more dimensions would also mean difficulties at interpretive stage. So, the researcher must keep in mind the optimum number of dimensions that may be taken. The next step that we may follow is mapping the results and defining the dimensions. After running the MDS software, the data is converted to Shepherd diagram. Shepherd diagram is the scatter plot of input proximities against the output distances for every pair of items scaled. Then we test the results for reliability and validity. There are number of methods or various tests available, but to test the validity and reliability of the results after MDS application. Some of the tests are Kruskal's stress test, split data test, data stability test, etc. R-square can also be calculated to determine the proportion of variance contributed by scale data upon MDS procedure. And of course, the last step would be to report the results of MDS comprehensively. Applications of MDS. The MDS is a complex statistical technique which is difficult to apply and comprehend too. Nonetheless, it has its applications in the wide fields of natural and applied sciences. Some of the areas where we can find the use of MDS to the data are field of knowledge that require scientific visualization of the data like cognitive science, ecology, marketing research and informatics. In the field of psychology, MDS proves its utility in studying the cognitive processes, psychophysics, psychometrics, etc. In the area of geostatistics, for modeling the spatial variability of the patterns, and linguistics, as MDS helps in understanding the natural language processing, semantics by representing the concepts in multidimensional vector space. The summary. In this module, we have studied two multivariate statistical techniques, namely principal component analysis and multidimensional scaling. The principal component analysis is the method to study, visualize and analyze the large data sets. The aim of the PCA is to transfer a set of correlated variables into a new set of uncorrelated variables. In unidimensional scaling, one specifies the dimensions in advance and the responses are generated accordingly. However, in reality, stimuli vary on a number of dimensions simultaneously. In MDS, the subject would not be informed in advance about the dimension on which the response is to be generated. Rather, overall similarities or dissimilarities in the stimuli are the basis for responding. The implicit model of how similarity judgments are produced by the brain is that items have attributes such as size, viciousness, intelligence, furriness, etc. in varying degrees, and the similarity between items is a function of their similarity or dissimilarity in scores across all attributes. The multidimensional scaling is a statistical procedure that aims to visualize the similarities among the entities in a data set. The basic algorithm used for MDS is that every entity in the data set can be represented in a p-dimensional Euclidean geometric space. Representation and visualization of the data set is complex mathematical proposition. Statistically speaking, MDS attempts to find a set of vectors in a p-dimensional space. The different spatial representation of the MDS are classical MDS, metric MDS, and non-metric MDS. There are several steps in applying the MDS to the research, and they have also been discussed in the text. As MDS is a complex statistical technique which is difficult to apply and comprehend too, nonetheless it has its applications in the wide field of natural and applied sciences.